workshop to order. Karen, can you just note roll call for the meeting minutes? And if you could all rise for the pledge of allegiance, then has a flag on the screen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Quick reminder, we are in workshop format this evening, intended to be a working session and collaborating session of the EDA. We do have an agenda before us, but this is a far less structured environment than our regular council meetings. Not expected to take any official action this evening. Anything that we discuss tonight will come back to an official meeting for official action. This is intended to be working session only. So look forward to some good collaboration and discussion. Danny, you guys started tonight with the Humphrey study presentation.
Yep. President of the EDA. Tonight, kind of the main topic will be going through the Humphrey Institute downtown study. Kind of want to start out with just a backtrack on the timeline, kind of how this started, what the process was to get the study completed, and then kind of touch on the methodology that the students used for this. I did meet with the authors of the study for about an hour. I actually invited them all to come and do this presentation, but they said no. They had other classes to go to, which I totally understand. So I was hoping that they would be here to actually do the presentation. So I basically downloaded all the information from them and then tried my best to summarize what they have here in this presentation. So if there's a really in the weeds question I may not be able to answer right away, I'll take that back to the group and ask them for it. But I'll give as much of an overview of this as I can. If you recall, this project started back in September of 2019. I went actually down and met with the students in September, talked to them about what we were kind of hoping to get out of the project, which was a focus on the trade area analysis for downtown Forest Lake, but also realizing that this is a class they took for credit for part of their program, that they needed to probably incorporate some things that was in line with what their specialty is. So I offered them kind of a little bit of ability to flex with that, and I think you see some of the results of that in this paper here. It was completed back in December of 2019. The professor had to do a couple of last minute reviews to it, and I got the final draft in January. The three authors of the paper are actually, their focus is urban planning. So that kind of, as you read through this final report, you can kind of start to see they really started to focus on the planning elements of it. And I think that's where their strongest suits are. That's where all three of them are actually going to planning once they graduate from Humphrey Institute. So they kind of took a planning approach to it, but also did a trade analysis for us as well. Some of the methodology that they focused on was they actually focused on two economic zones. First one being the downtown zone, which is the red area there on the right-hand side of the screen. And the second is the highway business district. I did give them both of those areas. The professor asked for any other internal, kind of retail area within the city. So these were provided to them. However, they did a better job of defining the highway trade district than I did. I kind of just circled it on a map and gave it to them, so they actually did a much better job of creating the map. Within both of those zones, they broke it down to three analyses on them. First one was a spatial analysis. Second one was a zoning policy review. Both of these fall under different zoning classifications. And then they dove into the retail trade area analysis, and then they kind of rolled all of that up and crafted a list of recommendations that you see at the end of the report. One of the things that they started out with was demographics, and ordinarily I probably would skip over this since a lot of people are kind of familiar with the demographics of Forest Lake. However, they did come up with a key piece of information that I wasn't aware of beforehand, so I'll hit on that just a second here. Based on the data they had, the population of Forest Lake was a little over 19,000. We're currently up over 20,000, but their data set was from 2017, so it's a little bit older data, but it's still close enough to show that it's good enough for this analysis. The largest demographic in Forest Lake is the 35 to 64, or 41% of the population falls within that demographic. Current housing stock, a little over 7,000. With their projections, they'll bring on an additional 5,000 units between now and 2040. So quite a bit of growth is baked into their looking forward for Forest Lake. This bottom one here, this is kind of the key factor that I'll want to compare on the next slide here. So it's median household income. When we look at the city as a whole, the median household income is $77,816. So pretty decent household income for the city as a whole. But where this gets really interesting is when you actually take a look at the downtown district as a whole and start to parse these numbers out. You see a significantly smaller population, again, would be expected. You're looking at a smaller portion of the city. Population there, 669. The demographic profile, from what they found, matches the rest of the city pretty closely, so the breakdowns from a demographic standpoint are pretty much the same. You're looking at roughly 400 units of housing, about 5.7% of the stock exists in our downtown area. But this median household income is the one that just stood out on me. You have a significant reduction in the median household income for our downtown district. One reason why I bring this out is that if you have a site plan that's looking at demographic information for our downtown area, and they do a small area outlook, they're gonna see a pretty low household income compared to the rest of the city. We just need to be cognizant of that, so if we're meeting with, like we were talking, our marketing materials just need to kind of adjust the fact that, you know, if they're looking at just that really small, narrow focus, they're gonna see a pretty small, they are gonna see a smaller median household income, but when you bring it out to the full city, but that number really stood out when I was looking through the report. Also, the education level of the area surrounding downtown is less than, on average, in the rest of the city. You see less advanced degrees or less degrees beyond high school in this downtown area. So there are some pretty stark differences from our downtown corridor when you compare them out to the rest of the city.
Is part of the reason median household income is low, is that partly being driven by like Sugar Point and, like how would that,
It could be the multifamily that's there. I'd have to go back through and actually ask them for like the actual source to just get it. You know, I mean, again, I'm kind of looking at this at I got it at the 20,000 foot level, but this is definitely one thing that I think, you know, is deserving us of additional look through.
Yeah, I think also that you're right, that some of it has to do with Cherry Point, but also you don't have as much residential to increase that. And the quality of residential is pretty high in some of the other areas of the city, along the lakes and some of the developments. So, meaning since you have more commercial, you have less residential, then probably are taking effects on that lower.
Did you say this was from the demographics for 2017?
Correct.
So then we don't have the 104 from Lighthouse Labs or any of that income factored into here?
Yeah, this is, you know, I mean, it's pre-Lighthouse Labs going as far as I know. I mean, again, they took it from 2017 data. I mean, and all of this data with the census going on starting in 20 is due for a refresh when that data comes available. So we are gonna get a a new set of numbers here in the not too distant future, which will, you know, update these numbers. But I kind of look at this, if a selector comes in and is looking at this and they're drilling down, you know, that's a number that potentially could flag. So it's, at least we're aware of it. One thing that they did focus on, and they kind of took this upon themselves, and I kind of gave them a kudos for it, because we never had thought to do this, and I brought Donovan, who's our zoning administrator, with to the meeting, and he actually mentioned that too. He never actually kind of did this step-by-step analysis that they had done. So what they did was they compared B2, which is the highway business district, to the MU1, which is the zoning district that overlays the downtown area. And on page 8 of the plan, they went through kind of what their suggestions were for the plan. I don't necessarily want to focus so much on what they did from the differences, more on the 20,000 foot viewpoint as to why they did this analysis. And what they found was that when you look at it, there's a lot of similarities between the B2 and the MU1. And one of the suggestions that they told me in the meeting was they were looking at it from, if you're trying to create a unique downtown versus a mixed business district, you might want to zone that differently to kind of create that characteristic of a downtown. So they started here, and their focus was for the B2 is to keep it more of an automobile focus, where the drive-throughs are there, the big box retail is there. Make the MU1, the downtown, more focused on pedestrian traffic, try to zone that to encourage like art galleries, theaters, the multi-use residents there, taverns, restaurants, the stuff that you get out of your car, you walk from location to location. One kind of, you know, thing that they pulled out, like on the restaurant side, For the B2, fast food and full service there, and the MU1 do a full service with no drive-through. You know, it's one of those ways that you can differentiate between the two. But I thought this was a pretty unique way to, from a zoning perspective, is to differentiate your downtown from the other districts within the city. The trade areas, so this is where they went into when they did the spatial analysis of the two different trade areas. First one that they did was the downtown trade district. Here what they did is I supplied them with our export of all of our GIS files, or property files out of our GIS system. They applied a color code to each one of those files and then created a map that shows how is the land currently being used downtown. Again, a surprise out of here is that when you looked at the downtown trade district, roughly 47% of that land is already zoned residential. I had no idea it was that high. I thought it was less than that. 53% is in the public or commercial space. That's there. You do see a lot, anything that's red on this map is the commercial space, the blue is the public, and then the yellow and the orange is the residential use. But we look at it from a spatial side, there's quite a bit of residential within that district, which again was a surprise to me. When they looked at that trade area from, on the spatial lens, they took a look at what are the assets that are downtown, and the two main assets that popped up was the lake and Lakeside Memorial Park. They looked at that for what is a reason why people go downtown, and those are two of the assets that they saw kind of existing in our downtown area. They also took a look at some of the challenges, like what are some of the challenges that our current downtown area faces. One thing they brought up was a lack of activation. And what they said by that was there's a lack of programming in Lakeside Park. That, you know, what are those events that drive people to go downtown? What creates that destination downtown? They did reference that Arts in the Park happens, the 4th of July is there, but they said they saw an opportunity for more activation of that space to drive traffic into the downtown area. So one of the challenges they saw was a lack of activation. We spoke a lot on the connectivity of downtown and how it's fragmented at this point. What they kind of looked at it was downtown kind of exists in island states. It's sort of these little pockets of retail, pockets of business, surrounded by parking lots. There's not a real easy way to get all the way through the corridor. It's sort of fragmented. They did comment that the roundabout is one of those pinch points that's tough. It breaks the area up east and west, north and south. It's tough to cross there. There's sort of this barrier which kind of islands the Broadway corridor from the rest of downtown. Trail access was another major issue that they came forward. One of the students who was here actually rode his bike along the Hardwick Free Trail as part of his How We Explore Town. And as he rode up on the trail, there was no wayfinding on the trail to get from the trail to downtown. He also brought up the point that there was no bike racks in downtown. He goes, even once you were to get downtown, you can't park a bike. And as part of that conversation, we were commenting on once you cross to the east side of 61, there's not really even a place to safely ride your bike because you're not supposed to ride on the sidewalk and you go behind. So there's not even a way to safely maneuver your bike through downtown at this point. So trail access is one thing that they saw. You have a great corridor there, but we're not tapping into that. So that's fragmented from the rest of the downtown. The Lakeside Memorial parking lot, the municipal parking lot, was also one of the areas that they saw leads to the fragmentation. They see they see the lake, the park, this giant parking lot, and then a commercial district. And they said if you could take that parking lot, repurpose that, redevelop that as a municipal use, take that parking that was there and reposition it somewhere else within the city, like in a ramp or, you know, on a different lot, would help to activate, would create more of a buzz in that downtown area. But they said that parking lot in its current location actually is served as a barrier, you know, for that activation of that downtown area. So those are the three main challenges that they identified in the trade area for downtown. The highway trade district, the spatial analysis, here you see more of a similar use out there. You see almost everything in this trade district being commercial, a little bit of industrial kind of peppered in there. And they did grab some multifamily and single family in there. I think that was just more of the way where they drew the line, you know. So the highway trade district definitely is more of a singular use when you look at it, especially, and for everybody's reference, 35 is in the middle, Broadway's the road that goes east and west there. Two of the assets that they saw in the highway trade district was I-35 number 1. A lot of traffic goes through there. They saw that as an asset. They also saw the auto orientation of that as being an asset. People can easily get off the freeway, get to their destination down there. So they saw those two areas as the two major assets in the highway trade district. They didn't go through a lot of challenges down there. I think their main focus was the downtown corridor, but they at least wanted to acknowledge some of the highway trade or highway business districts as well. Retail trade analysis. Just want to give a brief definition of some of the terms that are in the report. They talk a lot about a 12-hour activation cycle versus an 18-hour activation cycle. They talk about it a lot, but they don't do a really great job of defining it in there. So I did ask them, I said, what do you mean by 12-hour versus an 18-hour? They define a 12-hour as your typical office hours, 9 to 5. It's more of a passive use. People get there. They come in the morning, you have a flurry of activity between 7 and 9 when people go to the office. You kind of have a flurry of activity around lunch hour. Another kind of activity between 5 and 7 as people leave. But it's more passive. People that are there for a reason, typically work. But that's the 12-hour cycle. The 18-hour cycle is where you take the use and you extend it on. You have a reason why after work you go out for dinner in the downtown corridor. You grab a drink after work. So you're there beyond that 7 o'clock. You're there till 9, 10. So the trade area has a longer, more hours. As part of that, it also they focused on changing it to an active use, and what they mean by that is you have destinations downtown. You have the retail shops that people go down to on an hourly basis, and that those patronages cycle hourly. So people come in, go to a retail shop, we'll grab a cup of coffee, that whole patronage will turn over in an hour. So you kind of go from the passive 12-hour to the more active 18-hour. And a lot of the recommendations are focusing on doing that active 18-hour district downtown. So when you see a lot of those, when they talk about the active district, that's what they mean. But I had to ask them that because they put it in there, and I think they forgot just to put a little definition in there. So I just wanted to give that to everybody here so that everybody knows the difference between the 12 and 18 hour. They also talk quite a bit about an opportunity gap and a surplus in terms of what the supply is for downtown. An opportunity gap is that when you look at the trade area data, there's demand for the certain good or services exceeds the supply. So for instance, let's say restaurants downtown, the demand for it's 100,000 and supplies 50,000. Well, there's a $50,000 gap. That's somebody to come in. That's an opportunity for a business to come in and capture that additional gap that's there. Surplus is when the supply is larger than demand. So you can flip those numbers around. You have $100,000 worth of supply in there and $50,000 worth of demand. You have a $50,000 excess. All of the data, when you look at this, is based on a defined area. So when they do this trade analysis area, they'll define the boundaries, and it's that opportunity and surplus is all defined on what is in that area. A surplus isn't necessarily a bad thing, because when you look at expanding out the area, you'll see what happens that typically you'll do. It's called the pull factor. You'll be able to pull in business from outside that particular district into the district so your resident that say lives outside of the city will come into the city to spend their money in that particular district. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a surplus in there. However, most businesses will look for the opportunity gap, to look for the underutilized markets where there's some gap in there where they can come in inside a business and take advantage of that gap. One thing that the team kind of thought of was using the highway district to feed downtown. And one of the thoughts behind that was the highway district, people get off 35, they do their big box retail store, and then if you have this active downtown use, you'd have a reason for them to get off, Broadway, to go downtown, to grab a drink, to go visit a boutique shop. So they're looking at taking advantage of that high traffic I-35 corridor, the highway business district, and then feed that over to the active downtown use. So they kind of see these working hand in glove. You can attract them in on the highway district and then bring them downtown if you activate those downtown uses. When you look at where they saw the opportunity gaps, they saw these are based on, I have a full set of spreadsheets and PDFs that go through each individual sector, and it'll say, here's the market, here's the supply, here's where the gap or surplus is. When they summarized it, they saw opportunity gaps exist in furniture and home furnishings downtown. grocery store, general merchandise stores. They focused in on this one, given the fact that they see additional residences go downtown, there's gonna be a demand for them to wanna walk to a grocery store, like if you say another development happens, similar to Lighthouse Lofts, there's gonna be a demand for those residents to wanna walk to a grocery store, you know, like a urban footprint, like a Trader Joe's type, or a Lunds Bio you'd see downtown St. Paul, one of those type stores. The numbers actually do support that there is an opportunity gap for that type of establishment downtown. Their kind of X factor was drinking places, bars and taverns. There actually exists right now an opportunity gap in bars and taverns in our downtown area. They focused on building material and garden equipment and supply, and they put that in there. I left it on the list, but I put it in italics and put it at the bottom on the caveat that when you look at our data in whole, we actually trend extremely high in the building material and garden center outside of this downtown area. So our other districts, we have quite a bit of surplus of that. And I think trying to focus in on the downtown, they just looked at too small of a demographic pool for it. So while it's there, there's an opportunity gap that exists in the data set. I think when you start to bring that out to a more macro level, it starts to not look quite as attractive. But the other three do still hold up when you bring it out to more of a macro level. On the restaurant side, they saw a large surplus. We do have a large surplus downtown, $2.4 million worth of surplus that exists in our restaurant business in downtown. And you bring that down to the next level, 1.8 of that is in full service restaurants. One thing here, they said it's an opportunity to diversify your restaurant stock since we do have such a large surplus in here. What it does show is that we have a large pull to downtown for us. Like we naturally have residents that are pulling in to downtown to go out to eat. So we already kind of have that established trend of people going to a downtown area for restaurants. So they said it's an opportunity to potentially diversify your offerings to increase that surplus.
Surplus or opportunity gap?
Surplus.
Can you flip back to the definition?
Yep.
I'm puzzling over this one as well. So a surplus is supply is larger than demand.
Correct.
So it's 2.4 million
Surplus.
supply in a
Yep.
full-service restaurant, then there's a demand for it.
So it's actually being met right now, so this is where it becomes in this is where you have to factor in the pull area. So there's a pull factor where, one of the reasons why this number is gonna be so high is that we have a lot of restaurants downtown, but we have a smaller resident base, right? So the demand in there just naturally is gonna be lower, because we only have, say, 700 residents. On a per capita basis, only spend so much on restaurants annually. But obviously it's performing, there's a much bigger pull that comes in. So now what they do is they're pulling in from outside the area. They're pulling in from, you know, say Chisago, from Wyoming, from, you know, Wyoming, or kind of all over the area down to create the surplus. This is one where if you start to pull those numbers out, you'll start to see the surplus will go down because the demand goes up, but then you're in a larger area. So this is where it's that micro versus macro lens.
So does this mean that they said that from a downtown only perspective, taverns would be more self-sustaining and there's demand for more taverns? However, any focus on full service restaurants, you would need to have a broader destination approach where you're
Right.
pulling in because there isn't natural demand within that small self-sustaining footprint. Is that-
Correct, yeah,
okay,
so like
sorry.
on the bar, and that's where they kind of said that caveat of like the
Interesting.
tavern location, when you look at it within the district, when you look at just the downtown, there's not a bar-only classified place that's there, so there is a demand that exists naturally within that population. But on the restaurant side, obviously, we're pulling in much more, so I mean, this is one where eventually you get a big enough area, those numbers will start to level off. But if you look at the city in general, we pull in restaurants. If you look at the city in a whole, we have a surplus citywide, but we're still able to attract restaurants in because of that pull factor. So this is where they did a good job of starting that analysis, but there needs to be more of another kind of go through that data again and start looking at it through, you know, different levels of how far out you go. But I did say that in the bottom there that it does, that small residential footprint kind of was one of the reasons why there's such a surplus down there. But they did say when they looked at it, there's no opportunity for diversification down there because of that strong pull, which is, again, kind of leads to the fact that you already have a kind of a reason where people are going downtown. You can capitalize that to start to kind of build that momentum for that activated trade area. Some of the recommendations that they came out with, on the economic development side, prioritize the development of a grocery store in downtown, one of the recommendations. Small retail bookstores and sporting goods store, they said there was also opportunity gaps in those three areas, down there that they said, what they recommended focusing on. And then again, to add additional restaurants, and again, I caveated it out because we're now going from that gap to the surplus, so that is gonna factor into that larger pool area. On the programming side, adding in some additional events, would help to create that destination, and then active use downtown. Focus on using Lakeside Memorial Park. And I think a key factor in this too is that ensuring that the businesses are actively participating in the events, that they know the events are going on, that they have awareness of it, that they're active participants, because again, that's gonna help get those people down there, where there's gonna be, you go down there for the Lakeside Memorial Park event, but then you can go get ice cream, or you can go get something else, and those businesses will be open and aware that the events are going on, and you get better, it leads to a happier business community when they're aware that there are things happening downtown to bring customers and traffic in. On the infrastructure side, again, here's the recommendation to infill the development of circus parking and shift it to location. Their thought, again, from the planning side, is that by encouraging the infill development of our existing parking in the municipal parking lot, we could create some additional spaces down there that would draw more people in to our downtown corridor. Working to address the issues brought forward by the roundabout and helping to work to reconnect downtown, what we can do to help reconnect there. And then working to connect the local businesses with the district assets. That can be, putting up a kiosk or wayfinding on the trail, that asset of the trail, making sure that people know how to get downtown, creating some wayfinding maps. There are some low-hanging fruit that can be easily addressed as a result of what they brought forward, is to get people downtown, make some awareness of trail connectivity to the downtown corridor. On the policy side, they recommended reducing zoning code redundancies to again, from the zoning side, is to keep the character of downtown separate from what you see in the highway business district. These are some of the key takeaways. Encouraging activation of the 18-hour downtown environment. They recommended a development of a downtown marketing campaign. This would be separate from what you see in Forest Lake. This would be more specific just to that downtown area, bringing out that character of what the downtown district actually is. They said we're too automobile orientated downtown, so we need to shift that and make that more pedestrian. So an increase in pedestrian facilities is a key takeaway. Next steps, this was when I went through this thing and ran through my summary and looked at it in whole. I think some of the next steps is looking at where they started in the trade area. I think there's opportunity to go back into that data and really start to pull out some of those differences in terms of what we currently have from our opportunity gaps and surpluses. They started working on a business inventory for downtown, so they actually started compiling a spreadsheet. It's not by any means full. They had limited time to come down and actually verify addresses. They pulled some from Google. They did some door knocking when they were there. But one of the things they recommended to get temporary staff in to perform a downtown business survey, so we can actually have an active list and make sure all of our, we have a list of current businesses down there. They did give us a good starting point, but they did not have time to get that completed. And then also, as we shift into the downtown planning process, is to give this document to them as a starting point. There's a lot of good information in here. This is for them to start out with. So again, I did tell them that as we go through the downtown planning process, we at least let them know that this study exists, and they all were pretty enthusiastic about this actually being used moving forward. So that's the Humphrey Institute, on a pretty granular level. So at this point, I happy to answer any questions or comments on the study.
Questions, thoughts?
Sounds like there's some simple things we can start off with.
Yeah,
Really simple.
there are.
Bike rack.
It's nice to see. Maybe we can handle a bike rack.
Yeah, a trail on the way to get down there. Parking thing has me a little bit puzzled, because that's gonna be a challenge. Okay, where we have it, it's already jammed down there, especially with the lake access and all that, and so that's gonna take some thought.
But if we did take that away and made part of it more green space, wouldn't that free up on the sewer issues that we're looking at for impervious?
So I'm not arguing that. I'm just arguing the fact that
Yeah.
we've got a bunch of cars, the place is jammed all the time, especially if there's anything going on in the park.
Well, and there's
But
schools.
if you make it friendlier, more friendly pedestrian, that kind of, Yeah.
I mean,
but so,
Pool spot,
uh,
that parking ramp that nobody wanted, that's convention center.
anyways, I just brought it
Yeah.
up for, because that's, that kind of,
I think it was,
I kind of stumbled on
you
that.
know, it was good collegiate thesis material. you
Oh,
know,
definitely.
That gets carried the ball a certain amount and throw out some ideas. I think the reality program will come when we get the downtown business idea going, where we get people that are stakeholders that have their own dependency on certain attributes and others that wonder how you can move puzzle piece A out of the way to get puzzle piece B going. I mean, if you add this general overview to that reality programming, I think we'll get, I'm hopeful we'll get in the stage when we sit with the public, with the business owners. I've sent this study to a couple of business owners downtown just so they can be walking along with the process at this point. But I think once we do that, and I hope we reach out to essentially, I guess, the whole downtown, all the stakeholders, because we're not gonna isolate on given people. We'll start to get a real sense of what a movement might be. How do you get grocery? Does grocery really make sense? All the rest of that goes with it.
And then how do you get, I love the idea of what they were talking about a bookstore and small retail shops and things, but then to keep them alive and thriving and getting the community to go there and use them. Key, but all part of this, everything's gotta work, it's like a watch, you know, it's all the different pieces.
I think part of that's also back on city and programming and driving activity at the park and increased, you know, kind of organized utilization of that park space, and how do you create more activity there that brings people there, and then there's, you know, supporting businesses to keep them there, for sure.
I like the idea of, that they at least started the list of businesses, because I know, I'd like to see that too, you know, because there's lots of times when we're doing things, I'd like to be able to communicate with the goal area, not just the people that we know. So, I like the start of that.
And they did say, they gave me the big asterisks of like, you know, we only got to so many on the list, cause they, again, they had limited time, they were, you know, 40 hours a week, you know, working on this, so it's, but they said that from their side, when they were starting to run the data, they said that was one of the weak spots, that we did not have an active list of everything there, so you couldn't verify it up against, you know, some of the other more aggregated data that they had, you know, they wanted to kind of run those comparisons out, and they said that would be step one, is to get that list, is the recommendation.
Well, and we just finished an update of our whole database of, so as far as the members that are, people that are members down there, we'll have that, so we can merge those two pieces together.
As far as the wayfinding off the trail, a number of years ago, we got a grant, Doug Morgan did, to do the wayfinding around town. There's signs directing to different things. I think that is the trail. There's a lot of people passing through, so I don't know if there's an opportunity there to get a grant. If the city wanted to spend that money, that is a good suggestion to drive people off the trail into town.
I agree. And the other challenge on being on that trail is by the time you get on the bridge and by the time you get off the bridge, you're kind of out of downtown. And so how do you tee those access points in a way that, and then provide the path so that it's, I think people think, well, we might stop in Forest Lake, and then by the time they've passed if you're going north, by the time you've passed and gotten off the trail, you're kind of heading out of downtown, and so, and that bridge isn't going to go away, but how do we create better signage on both directions and some access points?
Because they do have, I don't know if it's a fight, they do have access from the back of Mallard's and that building, but it's not noted or anything.
It's probably, not even probably very poorly marked, right?
Yeah,
There is a spot, but
Yeah.
it's not well
But
marked.
that would be, like that road right before them, the new road,
Right?
that would be a great location, because then you come in, you've got the crosswalk there, so that would be an ideal.
We have no official trailhead now in this area, do we? Start at the library, there's something down there by the park and ride. Coming this way, there's several little places where you could do it, like where the police station is, and then where
Yeah.
White House lofts are.
Right.
but I don't think there is any kind of definition of trailhead.
There used to be, the old city hall, the former city hall, St. Leo's Lofts was at one point a trailhead. People usually use the parking lot and go out and access the trail there. But that whole went away as part of the redevelopment that happened up there. And I guess unofficially, we've always offered people to park here and use it. And you do see some users will park over there and use the trail, but it's not, we don't have like that official parking and mapping and all that kiosk stuff as a officially mapped designated trailhead.
Yeah, there's a need, they use our funeral home parking lot a lot of times, and you'll see them getting their bikes and getting on the trail. And then as far as the bike racks, you know, the Lions, they're looking to places to spend money, maybe that's an opportunity where they would be willing to put their name on it, they put some bike racks up, I'm sure.
Other things that jumped out or notable items of discussion?
Well, when he mentions furniture and home goods, the big question is, how do you compete? How do you bring in somebody and keep it alive? It's a great idea.
I was actually a little surprised that that made the list, because as I think about that downtown area and what we have, we do have, you know, we have Vintage Junkie and we have C. Stewart's, which is just, you know, only open occasionally. New Home during the time of the study was still there, unfortunately now they're now closed, and that was one of the boxes I expected us to maybe check more solidly than some others. But maybe that's also just part of, you know, comparing certain inventory to other communities, and it is a common, you go to New Downtown and there's always many stores like that.
It also could be like on those, how those upscaling stores are classified. They could be classified in a different category and not necessarily, may not be a traditional furniture store.
Yeah.
So then, and that's when you start looking at the data set, you'll see, well, need a furniture store, well, traditional NCIS classification is this. And
Right.
reality is that somebody's selling it, but they're classified as an upscale stop. You're not gonna know that unless you're on the ground.
Sure.
Dan, do you know that when they were talking about the study about the restaurant inventory and that, were they aware of what's going on at the old Laker?
They were not, I mean, they kinda came in, you know, I think they did most of this from existing data with a little bit of verification on the street. They asked me a couple of questions on some of the inventories and stuff, but I think most of this was, and I guess the nice thing is they looked at it from the perspective of like kind of a similar to how a site selector would look at it, where they wouldn't know those nuance differences and,
Right.
you know, but they did comment too, like on the, you know, the vacation traffic for the surplus. You know, they kind of assume that we get all these people that come out, you know, in the summertime that are just vacationing here. And I'm kind of like, I don't think we have that much. We don't have $1 million of the vacation surplus in here anymore, but again, you know, they did look at it, I think, more just from numbers and data set.
Do we know, I mean, that, you ask a good question, which might be something of interest for the downtown group to understand further, is what is the economic lift of vacation or seasonal traffic? I'm inclined to think that, I'm not sure it's a vacation draw, but I also don't know.
Maybe more day tripping.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
come and use the lake
yes,
for the day
right.
and spend some money coming and going.
Right. Right, or if, and so it'd be interesting to know what that baseline is today, and then it'd be interesting to know what that market opportunity is if we had some amenities, and what would those amenities look like? A lot of that kind of goes aligned with what we might want for Convention and Visitors Bureau, but
And I
I
could
think
see
there's
where
some
now if you're
interest.
talking about day trips and people needing to like grab something before they go out on the boat, now I can start to see, you know, make sense of a little grocery, you know, little store, convenience store type thing. Now that, you know, but then again, that goes back to that other side, cause somebody was talking to me about that too, that it's a shame that we have that whole, it's just parking lot right up to the lake where, but that location there then somewhere along there, like where the old mini golf was, then now that would be, you know, a nice place for convenience stores, things of that nature.
I think just anecdotally, I'm looking at the number, I think there is probably the numbers that maybe when I looked at them would demonstrate that there probably is some seasonal boost, just in the fact that you have pretty significant bumps that happen from the poll. You know, that poll data in terms of downtown is pretty amazing, actually, when you look at what the actual market should be versus, I mean, that surplus number for restaurants is it's significant, you know.
I can just interject something because I have Jerry Rutland, by the way. We know for a fact that there's in Lakeside Park access, because the boat inspections there, that between 6,000 and 7,000 boats a year come in and out of that park right there. That's a year. I mean, that's statistic, we have that, you know, from all of our boat inspections. So that's a lot of people somehow either taking the boat in, or putting it out or whatever. So there's a lot of, during the summer months, significant number of population that goes down in that area right there for the lake.
And is that only summer months? That's not vehicle traffic in winter months?
No, that's only
I thought 5,000
from May
people this weekend
through
used it.
September.
Okay.
Statistically, it's been that way for several years now.
And a lot of people will come to the launch, see how busy it is, and leave and go to the other two.
Yep.
Yeah,
They
there's
don't
that
have
too.
anywhere to park their trailer.
Yeah,
Right.
there's that too.
Yep.
That's gonna be one of the
Yeah,
challenges.
this
for sure.
parking lot is gonna be a.
And I told the group, I said, I appreciate at least bringing it forward, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's been a topic that, you know, and I think some of their approaches is, you know, it's interesting when they talk about shifting it, they said it's not a, you know, they said if you shift parking in there, if you kind of dive through, it's not gonna reduce traffic, it actually potentially is gonna increase it due to the fact that more people then would come downtown, because there's more activity downtown, so it's sort of like this, you know, on some level it doesn't quite make sense if I have less parking and more people coming in, but then if you look at the spaces don't go down, they just are relocated somewhere else, you know. And, you know, I was always told once, somebody once told me that, you know, some of these small towns don't have a parking problem, so go to San Francisco, there's a parking problem. However, if you have, and like there, you'll park and you'll walk for a mile to get to your location. They said, here it's a perception issue, you know, and that's part of it. So I did tell the group, I said, I appreciate them at least putting it in there to start to address it. I mean, it's probably not, their solution probably is not the easiest one or one that's probably gonna work, but at least that topic is now, you know, has been looked at by a group of planners, so I did appreciate that.
Well, and it comes back to if you could safely cross over 61, and if you had, you know, so it's kind of that combination thing. If you could park, it's not that far. If you walk a block or half a, you know, 2 blocks, not a big deal. But then again, you get that issue of safely crossing the road.
It would be interesting to know, and I don't know if this is a question for MnDOT or, if there's communities out there that have creatively solved for pedestrian perception of safety on crossing the roundabouts, like, are there things we're not doing that would increase perception of safety? And I do push a little bit on perception of safety, like, because I frequently cross the roundabout there and never have an issue, but if you don't frequently do it, and if you don't know what to expect, it's daunting. So it'd be interesting to know if there's, MnDOT has ideas, or if there's things that you can do that, you know, would create a perceived safer environment.
And I think that
People's
was perception
perception is
too,
their
right,
reality.
because the bikers, right, the guy that got hit, the
Yeah.
roundabout, they all know.
Yeah.
And so they're, if you're a biker, you know it's not a safe place to be. And so, and that was years ago already, so.
Yep.
Yeah, it's difficult to stop for pedestrian there too, because about the time you do that, then somebody behind you is trying to run you over, you know, so it's not a good situation. Gotta be a way, right?
Okay, yes. Down by Wells Fargo, there's a wonderful crosswalk that if that was publicized better, it would be more utilized. And if we could keep the people, so they didn't start speeding up until after Wells Fargo, that is the place that I see for people to be crossing with their children to be able to go over to anything over there at the beach area. That would make a really good loop.
It is one though that is in the middle of, it's in the middle of traffic, and that one, I cross there routinely also, and that one always makes me a little more anxious because you're not quite sure.
Does it?
Wait till everyone's at a complete stop before going out, just, but I think it's, I think, you know, pedestrian access and, overall safety needs to be on the list. You know, and if our goal here is to be identifying places at the city where the city should be active and what the city should be driving, you know, certainly parking and pedestrian safety, these are things that should be in our lane, so. Certainly more for the downtown group to consider. Dan, was there any, were there any recommendations that were specific to the, highway business district?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they kind of left, I think their focus was more on the downtown, and I think they put that in there, and they looked at that as how can you help attract people in there? I mean, I honestly, I don't think they gave that as much effort as they did downtown, which, again, their scope was to focus on downtown, and so I think, you know, they at least brushed it. There's no active recommendations for that district.
Had one little thing is, people still think when they're driving on the freeway that Clear Lake is Forest Lake. Can we just label the dang lake? So that when they're coming to Forest Lake, that maybe we can direct them into the real Forest Lake. It's really beautiful. Instead, they see this little puddle, and then we see Mud Lake on the other side.
That's Forest Lake.
Yeah, I mean, they really do.
And no,
People have been driving past it all their lives, and they still think it's Forest Lake.
Oh, because they can see it from the freeway?
Yeah,
I think that is Forest Lake.
that's Forest Lake, yeah.
And, which, and nothing against Clear Lake, it's a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah,
place,
yeah.
lovely,
But
lovely
we have a much
people,
better
but
lake.
it's a size perception of, well, it's not, it's gonna be a couple of laps on my boat and I'm
Yeah.
not, right, so.
Yeah.
Do we have a next starting point for the downtown committee idea?
Yeah. Good segue into next agenda item.
Yep, so,
Before we leave this, anything else, thoughts? I mean, this will be certainly food for thought for the downtown group to be considering. Any other points of conversation, clarification, homework you'd like Dan to take before we talk about this again?
When we talked about building the inventory, they suggested a temporary staff member. Is that how you see it, or can someone from this EDA authority actually start doing some of that and coordinate with the chamber and others to get whatever information we can?
either would work. I mean, I see, you know, my past experience, it's usually if you have someone who's getting paid to do it, because there's that carrot that they get paid to do the work. But if a volunteer from the EDA wants to do it, I mean, that's the other option too. But past practice has been that's how it takes, it's longer if you have volunteers doing it versus if you have paid staff. You can set a timeline of, you have 90 days, go, I want this in 30, you get quicker results that way.
This report is also public. I have sent some out, so it's okay that I do that.
Yes.
Okay.
I did let the group know that this is not gonna sit on a shelf, and they were kind of like, what? And I'm like, no, we're actually gonna have conversations about this and take some next steps, so. I said, I'm gonna keep in touch with the 3 students that did it, and let them know how it kind of evolved, so they can use it as, to help their careers out too, get them that resume piece of like, my study didn't just sit in a shelf somewhere, it's actually gonna be used and start some conversations. But yeah, it is public.
And I would say continue to keep touch with, stay in touch with that professor, because that professor has another class of students that needs to do another project, and we've got work.
We do.
One last little thing.
Yeah.
Signage. You know how Duluth has, on the highway signs, the green signs that the highway pays for, highway department, says Lakeside District. Can't we have a Lakeside District in that way? Then that would, you know, just before the exit.
Brian, how do we get into that class of signage that's kind of VinDOT assisted? I know we can do our own, but are those all municipal paid, or is there a?
City would pay for them.
Okay.
We would get it permitted through MnDOT, so that as a public use.
Got it.
Typically, they'll approve it. If it's for private, they won't approve those.
How much would it cost, ballpark?
Depends on how many signs you order.
One this way, one that way.
Less than $1,000.
Less than $1,000. Somewhere.
Put that into the low-hanging fruit category. Probably easier than getting a Clear Lake designation, right?
Clear Lake designation.
I'd love to paint a little sign and hammer it in there, it says Clear Lake.
Clear Lake.
Not Forest Lake.
That's the big one, right?
Yeah,
Not
right.
Forest Lake.
That's the implication we want, that's the conclusion we want to drive.
There's still the perception that you're in a lake town as soon as you see Clear Lake there. The idea, if you don't know the area, the idea that it melts into or somehow connected to Forest Lake, you're in the lake territory.
Well, I think that sign you're talking about would help expand that perception too,
Yeah,
for those that truly are clueless.
I mean, really are.
All great items. I know, Finn, one of your questions was how do we, staff and do some of, get some of the work done. My recommendation is that these become part of the working group, part of the list for the working group, and that we kind of take a look at, here is that body of work to be done, timeline, and then kind of resource out who's doing what and how we're supporting that based on that body of work. And it might end up being city staff, it might be paid resources, members of the committee. Let's kind of identify the what first and then start assigning out who and timeline. All right, anything else related to this item? Any topics that come your way that certainly, or thoughts that you have, certainly there'll be additional opportunities to discuss. And thank you for passing along our thoughts, our thanks to the group that did this work, and it's a nice starting spot. I shouldn't call it starting spot, it's a nice place to get us to the nice thing to get us to the next place. So, transition on to downtown committee.
Yeah, I think the main focus of the downtown committee tonight is to really kind of broaden that membership. Kind of talked about, who to put on the list. So everybody in front of us has a piece of paper and a pen, so everybody could write, start to actually put somebody on there so we could actually get a list together. I think that's step one, is get that membership defined, who's gonna be on the committee, and then start to go through that next level. So that's the main point tonight. Part of that, or kind of the next step as well, is, we talked about the last time of doing a downtown plan, of reaching out to planners, start looking at doing a formal downtown plan. I have reached out to a number of other cities that have recently completed a downtown plan. I had a long conversation last Friday with the city of Monticello. If you look at Monticello, it has a very similar kind of look and feel to Forest Lake, a little bit smaller, but has the river instead of the lake, but they have a freeway and kind of a business district that's kind of wedged between the river and the freeway, so they have a little bit smaller geographic area than the city of Forest Lake, but overall fairly similar makeup and feel. I talked to two of their staff members last Friday. They recently completed a downtown plan back in 2017, so I kind of got scope, how did it go, what did they like about it, what didn't they like about it. The main thing I also asked them is, how are they implementing that plan? So you go through this whole process, and then does it just sit on the shelf then? And I said, what's your next steps after it? And they said, the plan took about a year to go through the start process all the way to final adoption of the plan. Was about a year-long process. It started very similar to how it started here. It kind of started as it became identified as an area of focus, both at the council and at the planning commission, economic development. Sort of like this focus on, we want to do something in our downtown area, but we want to make sure that we plan it appropriately. So very similar kind of origin story between the two. After they went through the adoption portion of it, what they started to do was implementation meetings, where they went through the plan and said, okay, we have let's say we have 10 recommendations on it, which one do you want to start with? And they said, obviously there's low-hanging fruit. One of them was, they did some banner work down their downtown area. A couple of their streets, when they were doing street projects, they did curb extensions, which starts to put the foundation in for those larger projects. So what they've been doing is, they've been holding these annual implementation meetings where they keep going back to the plan and saying, okay, we've got these things are now done, we have this project going on, and they've actually seen some pretty good results from that. Some words of advice that they gave was public outreach was critical to these plans. They said to try to get the business owners downtown on board early on. They had their original downtown plan called for the leveling of downtown and starting over. Or some version of that. And they said, don't do that. I said, no, we're not gonna, recommend that. But they said that kind of, created some, issues that they just needed to get the buy-in early. So they said, if you can get buy-in early to make it feel like it's their plan, that it's not just, people in City Hall forcing something down upon the business and the building owners. They said, and their new plan is not a full raising of the city and rebuilding. It's a lot more holistic, and they said it's been better adopted, better feedback. But they said if you can get feedback, if you can get buy-in on the onset, you'll have better results moving forward. So they did say that public outreach is critical to the success of it. I also reached out to ULI, who came in, if you recall last year, kind of gave us that market analysis to see if they had any planning resources that we could kind of tap into. They do TEP panels where their technical experts will come out and review a plan. The benefit about having a ULI come into a plan is that they actually will provide that market-based data on it to say, hey, your plan will never work, the market's never gonna adopt to this. Or it'll say it's in line with the market. Their recommendation was when the plan's about 3/4 baked, bring them in, they'll take a look at where you're at and they'll say the market will work on this, the market won't work on this, they bring development experts in. There is an expense to that, and I'm working with them right now to get an actual quote for it. Monticello did not utilize the ULI panel, but they did have kind of a smaller market component to it, because again, you want to make sure when these plans come forward that there is a market that has some appetite for what's being planned, otherwise you have this great vision statement that's never going to materialize. So there's couple options to have the markets review of both, either the ULI or what the planner would typically bake into their plan. I think the ULI review is a little bit more robust than what's typically done in the plans, as they come out and they'll spend, typically a half day driving to downtown, reviewing the plan, taking a look at it, they bring their expertise in. But again, it's always a dollars and cents argument too as well, to see what those quotes come back at. So a lot of good outreach has been happening right now. I also have recommendations for some other planners that I have to reach out to. I haven't had a chance to communicate with them directly. So kind of assembling sort of like the cream of the crop in terms of planners, and we'll get that process moving forward. But just to kind of wrap this up, to kind of go back, is a starting point, again, membership is probably step one. So ideally the goal will be to get that membership kind of dialed in, and then there we can start doing work assignments and get the planning going. Go from there.
Anyone need a few extra minutes to get their nominees on the list?
So are we at individuals or people in certain segments or parts of the city or, downtown?
I think either or,
Right.
either or, just as big of a list as we can get.
Be as specific or general as you'd like, and then Dan, is the thought that we'll kind of collaborate on these after and get
Yep.
some actual invitations out and some
Absolutely.
information. Pass them to you.
Pass them to me, I'll take them.
Give a few more minutes, get your thoughts.
Like an exam, turn your paper.
Yeah, exactly.
You can always add to it later.
It's working
Go home and
session.
you forget about somebody.
In like reading this song,
No,
Yeah, right.
no, not at all.
Dan, I'll get you something tomorrow if that's okay. I want to get ownership names or the management names that are working, instead of just saying private building.
Perfect, yeah, no, I appreciate that.
So we had added this, whatever our list is, to a broad outreach to every person that that's part of, say, the downtown territory or impacted some stakeholders. And we'd add it to whatever else we know about businesses maybe not talked about at this point. So that really all the businesses from the pet shop on through somehow notified as being members, and then those that stay active, I guess.
Will you remind me how far we go, in this designated area? How far down 61 do we go? South, I mean.
I'll
like
pull up
this
a
lake?
map.
I just don't
State Farm in downtown district.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little further south, but I mean, remember we talked about some of those boundaries being,
remember.
it's not the
Kind
hard
of blurred on that.
end,
Yeah.
so.
And I also think, depends on what plan you're looking at or what map you're looking at, or whether or not, for example, Blake,
Right.
Blake's Floral is in or out, but I still think that some of those businesses may have an interest in participating, even if it may not actually, touch right beside their door, knowing that there's some.
Well, that's just it, we
Incremental
could go all the
impact.
way to, like, I just met the owner in the new gun shop. or, you know, the new one or the gun, I mean, so I'm just kinda, or even when we're talking about restaurants, I'm like, oh, does that include Don Julio's, or, I mean, you know, so that's why I'm a little confused as to what that,
And I think too, a key thing is like, a lot of what's coming out of downtown is gonna naturally bleed to the city as well, right? Like there's, I mean, this is not, I mean, kind of like this study was, that we had them do was supposed to be downtown focused, but it naturally just starts to go
Right.
outside. I mean, my personal thought is that if, you know, they're kind of outside that, what I call core downtown, and then they're going to participate as a business owner, I still think there's benefit to
yeah,
them. Because
for
some
sure.
of the policy discussions that'll happen in there will, I mean, most of the planning activity that will be in that downtown core, but if you're attracting people down to the park for some event, they're gonna be driving by the businesses as they get down there.
I wonder though, if, so, you know, you mentioned the new owners of the gun shop, and I wonder if we should be, if we owe it to those members to be more specific in that boundary, just to set expectations, and certainly they're interested and there might be a broader reason why they should participate, but, I do think we should get some definition at least for, at least call it phase one, just so that we're getting information and setting expectations so that, you know, the thought isn't that we're gonna, you know, solve the parking challenge
Right.
in front of.
Right. And I agree
gun
too,
shop
and
or
even
Music
then,
Connection or, right? you
how
know, like-
far, okay, so then is Cherrywood include, you know, again, I'm kind of that, how far on Broadway does it go? So I think that having some parameters, in my mind, even just in
Right.
helping bring people to the table, I think would be helpful, because what area are you really focusing on? Because really, truthfully, like your walkability, you know, doesn't go very far to the south of the roundabout, you know, certainly isn't to you, unless you put them on the trail, we know that. So, you know, you're stretching it to get them to Wells Fargo, like you said, right? You know,
Yeah.
so that's where I think it would be really, setting that boundary would be really helpful.
But you want the bike shop in on the north side, and you want the coffee shop in, because they would be interested in any kind of activities, especially if we're gonna beef up the bike trail access, we want the bike shop to want to be involved.
So here's the boundary that was talked about last, so this is Fourth Avenue on the north, Third Avenue southwest on the south, and then Third Street on the west.
Where's the bike shop, just for reference?
Bike shop would be, I wanna say, here, no, gosh.
On the other side of North Shore Trail.
Yeah. Yeah, they're up here, so there's.
Really, the Cyclones Gate?
Yeah, they're up there.
Yep.
The new coffee shop, so they're out of the area?
I think they're just right here.
Hmm.
When you're saying new coffee shop, are you meaning the?
The old house,
Yes.
the Lick Shiloh's house,
Yes.
the Lick Shiloh's, I've talked to them before, about, you know, doing something with seniors and biking, and they really do wanna be more involved, so they'd be really good to.
Where is the coffee shop, the proposed location?
On the old bench.
Right in that V, yeah, right there.
It's right next to the bike shop.
Yep, it's that brick house right in the corner.
That's the old pool house, they call it.
Right.
Because Fourth Avenue is Lighthouse Loft, so actually Lighthouse Lofts is out of that.
No, that's
Second Avenue.
Oh, no, it's not. Take that back, so it's Second Avenue, it's Lighthouse Lofts.
So how about the used car dealers, are they in or out? And there's a couple of them along.
They're just
there.
beyond the zone that's
They're
listed
beyond
up here.
the zone,
Yeah.
cause they're across from the pool house. Right? No, they're further.
Yeah, they're just, I think they're right up here, right there.
So is this set in stone for, like, can we,
You can tweak it, I
You can tweak it.
think.
we can do anything?
I mean, you could say, here's the core district, here's the middle ring, here's the outer ring, I mean,
Oh,
there's
yeah,
different
that
ways to do something like that, so.
Like that idea.
And then this was, the reason for this was that when when the consulting groups come in, I can say, here are their core focus of downtown, and then they can sort of blur in those lines out as they kind of see other uses work, but this is actually based on our MU1 zoning district, so there was some basis where we just didn't, kind of arbitrarily draw a line on the map, we actually had a zoning district for everything in there, should be, has similar zoning as well.
Can I ask a non-related question to this, just because it's been bugging me for like a half hour. So when you talk about the drivability, the other section in the study, that's off the freeway, so then I get confused about why it's such a draw for dental offices, right? Cause now we'll have 2 brand new dental offices in an area that seems to me to be very much automobile, not office related, but now we have, so, I just wonder.
Are those corporate, dental offices, the Aspen
Yes.
Dental and things?
Aspen,
There's
That's
Aspen going.
probably their model, then. I mean, in and out, right off the highway, I would assume that they know that where they locate.
So it's that
people can
drive-by
come
traffic.
Or just it's easier to get there instead of going into, getting the downtown.
Isn't-
The other one's
Something like that.
Southwest Dental,
Yeah, and
so
isn't
they're
dental
corporate.
in general that moving more towards that consolidated, large,
Yep.
large
Corporate
provider
dental.
model, and it's kind of retail dentistry, and so they're eating up a lot of, I think it's not just Forest Lake, I think it's in general, it's that model.
So that's what
Trying to
they
make an
want,
appointment
so
with the
that's what
dentist.
they want,
I mean,
okay.
they
Trying
know
to
what-
make an appointment with the dentist lately.
Yeah, they know what they do, they know what they're doing, they do their
Yeah,
studies, they
yeah,
know what
these
they
are
want to.
definitely franchise,
Yeah,
Yes.
so
for sure.
that's probably what.
I think it's that movement of that industry in general to move to a more consolidated franchise model. Yeah, I do think though that there's a public perception that we have more than our share of dental offices, or are getting more than our share of dental offices.
Which is a real bad reflection on the teeth of Forest Lake.
Right.
But then again, it probably goes back to the pull, they know, right? They know the area.
Well, and
that they're
trying to get
driving.
an appointment with a dentist in the lately, like, I think we probably do need more, cause
Right.
it's like, oh, we can get you in 3 months from now.
Just from on the economic side too, that's a destination, they're pulling people in to go to the dentist in this time. If, say, if you're my daughter and I have an hour I don't always have to sit in the office, I can go shopping
Yeah.
elsewhere, so there is that. That'd be one where the hand in glove to get somebody in the dentist office, they go downtown for grab a cup of coffee or whatever.
And then, I'm sorry, my brain is, so then the next, the other piece of this too then is to come up with marketing in that business district on the freeway, off the freeway, that then drives business to the downtown area, right? That was one of the pieces of.
They recommend a marketing campaign in general. I mean, they didn't go into like specific actual executables on it, it
Okay.
was still, here, develop a marketing campaign and.
One of the ULI recommendations though was better signage coming off of the freeway to direct towards the downtown business district.
Yeah.
Kind of cross-pollinate.
Well, because I think there's just a little lull on Broadway, enough to make people think, oh, this is it,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So,
Absolutely.
not realize it, just go a few blocks
Yes.
further and you're.
Yeah, if we ever change the lines in the downtown district, we should go west, not
Well,
north, not
Yeah,
north and
absolutely.
south. If those lines ever get moved, that's where they gotta go, that's in my opinion.
Thank you for bringing that.
Actually,
up.
connectivity of those 2 districts is probably
Yeah,
one of
exactly.
the goals that should come out is how do you.
Because there is a gap,
Mhm.
no question about it.
There's,
We call it the bar building, the meeting, because if you look at it, there's a big end on downtown, a big end in the freeway district, and so it's like a barbell on the map if you actually combine the 2 districts.
What the difference is zoning, how is Broadway zoned then? Is that multi-use or is that B2? B2?
I don't know what it is.
B2?
Most of it on Broadway is commercial, I know, but some of those lots aren't very deep either, that's been the issue. But we'd have to go back through that zoning and, back when we were trying to convince them to go at least a block in, so you'd have a whole block, and at that time, just years ago, the planner said, oh, no, you can't do that, and, but, I think the plan, the new comprehensive plan is to do exactly that, and it'll help.
Well, and then if you do that connectivity, then now having parking off the lake,
There you go.
that starts to make a whole lot more sense,
You
right?
have-
If you can develop,
Yep, and you'd be able to
That
have a
middle.
bike path running east and west there.
right, right. That's the answer to the parking, because it would be needed then further off the lake as
That
well.
whole area, it's old neighborhoods, old neighborhoods, and, yeah, if we're ever gonna redevelop, that'd be a good place to start, especially commercially.
yeah.
And that, opinion, and $3 will get you a cup of coffee somewhere.
$3, there you go.
I'm just trying to cover all the bases. Oh, shit.
It's like crazy.
Do you have what you need from us on
I do.
downtown
Yep.
committee?
Yep.
Next, that group official, do we have a kind of a kickoff meeting date in mind, or are we gonna regroup on that?
I think we're group, I mean, I think sort of like we talked about the last meeting, second meeting of the month is sort of like that downtown focus, and I think today was sort of like the soft launch
Yep.
of it, again, kind of focusing on that. I think probably the next February meeting, will be sort of more of the formal, outside of, we'll try to get the membership there as well and be more of a formal, here's where we are, here's what we have going on. I'd like to get us a little bit further on the downtown plan, make sure I bring something there that's more concrete and still sort of, so we'll see what comes back with the new plan for team on that.
I think also, setting the right tone for that first meeting is important, especially if we're going to have a lot of new folks that are just joining. Help set expectations on what we're going to be doing, timeline, and so get some materials to get them properly orientated and,
Yep.
and so they can plug in when it's important to them.
And I also don't want to get too far, and I know part of the work on for the downtown community was going back through the original studies. I don't want to get too far down that road before
Yes.
having the full membership there, because you kind of, you have people at different stages of understanding, and it's very
And we're gonna
technical.
have a little bit of that already, that first meeting is gonna be very redundant for those in this room that have been along for the full way, so, okay. Next item is the CDA grant application update.
This is just a brief update. So if you recall at the last meeting, we approved a resolution and a grant application for the phase 2 of the sewer study. And speaking with Chris afterwards and kind of the onset of this downtown planning, we're actually gonna combine both activities into one grant application. And so we're gonna take that approved one and kind of blend it out. So we're only gonna make one grant application versus making two. So like one ask for the maximum $40,000 that we can from Washington County CDA. Portion of that's going to be the downtown sewer study, but the remainder will be used for planning activities for downtown. We think it has a better shot of going through at the committee level as well. We're not kind of going back for these small different bites of the apple. We're just taking one bite of the apple. So wanted everybody to be aware that that's going to come back at the next EDA meeting for a resolution, so nobody's confused that didn't we just approve a grant application? He did. We're just going to retool it. So we have one application. It's still timelines out. Just I'll still go to the February 18th CDA board meeting and ask for approval at that point. So it doesn't change the delivery, we're just gonna change the amount and kind of change the application process up just to help give us better chance of success for funding.
Does the city kick in funds on that? How much then for the 40,000?
It'd be a 50-50 match, so it's $40K. And the reason we're asking for that full amount is that we don't know what the planning number is gonna be yet. So we wanna make sure that we have, the match in place before we get the planner on board, then we'll figure that portion of it out. Woodbury did something similar, wasn't it, like last year?
Yeah, it was up to 40,000, so.
Yep, so we'll go on one application versus kind of keep going back for multiples, and everything kind of rolls into the downtown with the sewer study and the planning, so it's just a cleaner process moving forward to go with one application.
And then that comes out of EDA funding?
Correct.
Any questions? Washington County?
I don't have any updates, but Dan, did you want to talk about this in the meeting we had today, briefly?
Yeah, I can. So the CBRE listing materials are in front, these actually just came over today.
Yep.
So these are hot off the presses, these just got released, so these are the materials for the Headwaters Technology Park, the Headwaters 123 acres that we have listed with CBRE. Chris referenced a meeting, we were at a meeting this morning with a consulting firm that does the financial modeling for data centers. So what they do is we've done a lot of work on the physical side of this to make sure that they have the right characteristics, the fiber, the power, sewer utilities, all those boxes. What they do, they take it one step further. They actually will take what are the current rates that you're gonna pay, and then they'll develop a 20-year financial model for the end user. What that does is that really helps the marketability of the site. So like if Dan Pearson gets a call and says, what's this gonna cost me over the course of 20 years? He can take a look and say, well, if you put this size data center in there, it'll cost you this much. A big benefit to that is they'll actually look and say, if you have, say, 10 megawatts worth of power at the site, they say you can build a 75,000 square foot data center there, and they'll actually will do that assessment. How does that lay out on the site? So if this group goes forward, we can start to look at kind of options for how that land actually would actually use or be utilized in the data center side. Right now, we kind of have some general ideas. This actually puts some pretty significant numbers behind it, and it'll actually will say, this 75,000 square foot site based on current zoning, current layouts will require this much land around it, and you get a really good marketing piece. So it actually has a lot of teeth to the marketing materials that the technology corridor has. So we had a good meeting with them. They're putting together the kind of proposals on what the numbers would be for the different sites within the corridor. There's some economies of scale that if multiple sites are in, there's less cost because some of their models, they can use them to do other models within the corridor. But it'd be a great first step. And what they want to do is they want to take a look at all of the sites that are currently in the corridor, and just based on the physical location and what's there, they'll start to look at, here's what we think are the best sites within there. They've done this for other counties as well, that they've done as part of their own county's lookout, like when the counties are looking to set their own centers for their own use. This would be one of the first ones that we're looking at it from technology corridor side. But again, the big benefit is here that you'd be able to deliver to a selector, here's what your actual cost of operations are over the course of 20 years. Because when you actually look at the numbers, it's the power and the refresh rates of the server equipment that actually drive the cost of these things versus the land cost over the course of 20 years is, he actually almost said, he goes, it's a factor, he goes, but it's such a small factor. He's like, your cost of power definitely plays more into the selector's minds, and by running those analysis, we'll know, are we in the market, are we out of the market, and if it comes back, if they're not favorable, then that use can be pivoted to something else, if those results come back to non-favorable. But this is a good, we have really good modeling off of this that gives us data behind, you know, what we think potentially, you know, for setting a data center on this site.
Great information. So next steps for that would be?
Chris kind of took the lead on it, so I was just there as a.
So he's gonna put together a proposal, and if we can get another city from another county to do their side of the county, we'll do our side, we'll do some cost sharing with them to pay for that analysis. And I think Connexus would come in and pay for a portion of it as well, so.
Wow.
So we'll come back to you with a proposal in
Excellent.
next month.
Perfect.
After listening to this consultant's view, I mean, I think that this, and kind of working with Dan on getting some of those materials for these, you know, these brochures, is that this just gives us a lot more data and makes us extremely competitive in the marketplace, because some of the examples were some of the sites that were built, some of the co-location sites had trouble filling up until they started running their modeling, and once the modeling was done, they filled them up, you know, within a year.
Is the goal, I don't know, is there a universal standard or something that we're gonna pay for the financial modeling and then that will be accepted by others?
Yes.
And so you don't end up in having bought the wrong
So
model?
this gets us
Is there a challenge?
Yep, it gets us one step closer to being shovel-ready. And honestly, for our perspective, from the planning commission, council, EDM members, this helps us get our arms around what is this thing, how much does it cost, you know, what does it look like, so that if a proposal comes forward, we not only have the geographic information, now we've got the financial information, we can know what the impact is, and it's a little less scary if you can get your arms around what data centers really are.
Does it also help us gauge what level of incentives we might be interested in or not interested in based on the economic opportunity, right? Someone's gonna mint money or it's gonna be a struggle, and so.
Exactly, and we wanna know that because we're competing with Des Moines, for example, on a data center, and if we're out of the market, okay.
Right, helps
let's
us
just
either
figure it out now.
flex up or down. Okay.
And I think they factor in heavily on the state incentives as well. So they'll say, what are the state incentives on the power, what are the state incentives on the equipment? And they'll factor all of that in, and they'll say, here's what you get if you come to Minnesota without the incentives, you're gonna spend X amount, you're gonna get this much back on your equipment. So I think that's where the competitiveness happens. And the key thing for me is that operational cost of what the actual power rates are gonna be is gonna help them get some assurance that if I make this investment, my operational costs are not gonna blow the bank down the road.
Excellent. Any follow-up questions on that? Thoughts of members of the media? Okay. Chamber update. Hannah, do you have anything for us this evening?
Lots of planning going on,
Yeah,
2000,
tis the season, right?
tis the season, yeah, and, mostly that, and the Lakes Area Expo, which is at the end of March, so.
March 28th.
March
I said
20th.
20th at the last meeting. Sorry, 28th.
Dan, I brought you a nice little piece of paper too. That's it.
Excellent, very good. Any other updates? Dan, Patrick, everything you need from us? Did everyone get their homework assignments in,
As far as I know.
or a commitment to have emailed in the very short term? And this is a rolling list, so if you think of something at 2 AM, certainly send Dan an email. All right, not having anything else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second, all those favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
I'll just check with the city.